All right, we're back, and we just finished talking about adding J labels and J text boxes to a J frame that's custom inside a J panel. Woo! JJJ for Java, right? We're back at it's COMP228, week 8, lesson 8, part 2 of our little broadcast. I'll do the recording at the same time for those people who are killing me with requests for doing that. Okay, so one of our students here said, hey, what if I want to use my setter? How do I do it? We had to change our setter here. The example setter was changed from the way it was before. And the way to set a label to kind of pop into the same place as an existing label would be to remove the old one, right? That's how I did it. Assign it the new reference, and then add it back in. And we just created a kind of a common add hello label method that we can use here and when we first add the label when we build our UI, right? Component right here. So that's kind of what we kind of did it twice. So we set it here, and then we, we're adding our add hello label in there. And Eclipse helped us build that by doing a search to see where we have to put it in. Okay, so we're cool. Notice how there's a bunch of these extra layouts here because I was monkeying around with the layouts inside everything else. I'm just going to organize imports here. It's going to get rid of some of those things, right? I'm going to go back and continue with our PowerPoint. So we've done these different text fields and whatever. And let's go back and see how they do it. They've got a certain number of text fields. They've got a JPassword field. And what they're doing is they're still using flow layout in the book, right, to set up and we're going to add the text field to the frame. That's what we're doing here. We're just using a JPanel as a container frame, a container onto the JFrame itself, right? And notice how it says text field.set editable to false. There's an option for a set field. Why would I ever want to do that? Why would I want to set editable to false? Anybody? Kind of disables the field, yeah? So imagine if I have, once I've made my selection, I want to disable certain fields. I can use the set editable method or the setter method to change my, my text field so I can't edit it anymore. That's what it does, all right? If I keep going here, here's something that's new that we've never seen before. I want to make something called the text field handler, right? Text field handler, which is, I'm going to kind of make a new, something called a new text field handler, all right? So text field handler is actually a built-in class, and it's a handler for our events, right? Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Here's my text field 1. Once I create a handler for my text field, I can add a number of action listeners. Now, I want you to compare this with who has kind of understanding of JavaScript. Anybody? Hopefully. Think about JavaScript. When I say add event listener, it's like my add action listener. All right, that's what it is, right? But in order for me to add an action listener or add an event listener, I have to add it somewhere inside Java, right? So Java requires us to create almost like this handler class. It's a container for all of our event listeners for this particular for text fields, as an example. So the text field handler doesn't just handle one text field, but a number of them. Okay, here's one thing that I'm doing here. I'm actually sharing my one handler with a bunch of listeners, right? So I've got a bunch of listeners, and I'm using one handler to handle all the listeners. Okay, how about the event lifecycle? How does this thing work? What are listeners? What are handlers? It confuses the crap out of students for the first time. Think about a listener as almost like I'm listening on a particular, for something to happen. I'm waiting for something to happen. My event lifecycle, when I'm actually creating a listener event or whatever, my event lifecycle is already functioning inside inside of my JFrame. My JFrame, my window, there's an event lifecycle that's going on. So anytime I click, move, type something in, it's going to trigger a bunch of different events. Now, I have an option. I can listen for these triggers, or I can ignore them. Typically, what we do, unless I specifically put in or explicitly code it in, I'm actually ignoring all the events that are going on in the window by default, right? Okay, so I can add a listener to a component, right? When I add a listener, I have something called a handler. So it handles what happens when the listener is triggered. An example of that would be, I want to add an action listener for my text text field number 1, and I indicate that there's going to be a handler that's going to handle it. We've mentioned that the handler is right here, right? We've kind of created a new text field handler that just does this, but it doesn't really do anything right now. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, here's my text field handler custom class that I made. Look, there's a private class called text field handler that implements action listener. That's what this thing does, right? And all I'm doing this, it needs to implement action listener because action listener is the interface that it needs to implement. Here's where we're going to talk about interfaces. So remember, interfaces are intents, right? When I create an interface, I have to, it creates almost like a structure for me to use. This is a great example of an interface here, right? So I need to override my action performed, this built-in method, my override, my action performed, and I got to pass into it. This is why it's more complex to do it here. My action event and event. Okay, so that's what I'm doing here. And then if my event.getSource is equal to a text field 1, then do something. If my event.getSource is equal to text field 2, so if I'm pressing enter, right? That's what I'm doing here in text field 1 or in text field 2 or in text field 3, then I actually do something different. I change my text field to something else. I actually assign my string to the text field, right? Okay, cool. And then what I want to do is my JOption pane, right? JOption pane.show message dialog null, and I want to show the string that I got from my, remember JOption pane, what it is, it's just like a message box that pops up. That's all it does. We learned that the first thing. So what this little code is going to do is pull this up. But what they've done actually is created this custom class called text field handler, right? Which is of type, which is a new handler, which is of type action listener, or that's what it is. It implements the action listener interface. And I'm actually, what I'm really doing, right, is I'm doing this action performed override method that I'm writing everything inside of. All right, let's write one for our text field. Okay, so we're going to do the same idea. Instead of text field handler, you know, what if I was to write it without one? How would it be? How would I write that? Can I write an action listener like this, an action listener with a handler, and just not even have a handler, just call a callback function like we do in JavaScript? Is it possible, right? Because we want to kind of take what we know and apply it to this new stuff, right? What do you think? Is it possible? You'd be forgiven to think that it might be possible, but let's check it out and see what happens, right? All right, so I've got my stuff in here. I'm going to go back to my example window, and I'm going to say this. So I've added in my stuff, right? Here's my, you know, my add UI components. And you know what? I'm going to, in my constructor, now that my UI components are there, I want to create an action listener, right, for my text box called name text box. So I'm going to type this dot underscore name text box, or name text field, right, dot add action listener, right? And what it's listening for is an action listener type of object. Here's my action listener, right? Okay, so let's type in an action listener. How do I do that, right? Let's go back and do that again, right? Action listener, and then it says I need to add in an action listener. Add action listener, and if you notice it's null, I can add in an action listener. Let's call this the name text field listener, right? We'll make it up. So we'll say name text field listener, okay, which is going to be this dot underscore, right? Name text field listener. Okay, cool. This is what it is, right? And that's where I want it to go. This name text field listener. I don't have one of those, so let's make it. So this is like we do in JavaScript. So we'll say private, and we'll say it'll return. Now, what should it return? Let's go back to the example on the code here to see what it returns. This custom class we made, right? And it's public void. Okay, it's a public void action perform, which is of this type action listener. This isn't going to work, guys. I can tell you right now. But let's just say, right? So we're going to call this void, and then this dot, oh sorry, the name of the file, which is name text field listener. listener. And then we're going to kind of open up the quotations here and see what happens, right? Oops, that's not what I wanted. Text field listener. Yeah, cool, right? Well, that's what the problem is. Look what the problem it says. It says, hey, named text field listener cannot be resolved or is not a field, right? Well, okay, that's interesting, but I wanted to go to my named text field listener, right? Did I do it wrong? Right, here's my private named text field listener, right? It returns void, right? And then here's my this named text field listener. Listener, did I spell it correct? Listener, yeah. What was that? The braces. Should I put the braces there? That doesn't seem right either. That means this is going to call the function in here. That's not what I want. If I do this, that's not going to do it. It's not going to adhere to this add action listener thing at all, right? So that's not right. It's got to be a reference to something of type, action listener. And this is why, if you look at the PowerPoint presentation, we need to create something of a different type, where my text field handler implements this action listener, because that's what it's really listening for, right? There's different ways to write this, but it's a separate class. So let's make a new class called, and we're going to call this name text field handler, right? That's what we're going to make. Let's try this out. So I'm going to go back to Eclipse. I'm going to make a new class where this obviously doesn't work, right? I mean, I told you, you'd be forgiven to think this is the right way to do it. We're gonna leave this here for a second. We're gonna make this blank, this action listener, right? And we're gonna add a new class in here. So under my source, I'm gonna add new class, right? And what I want to do is I want to implement an interface, right, with this class, which we're gonna call the name. Remember, this name is a class, so I'm gonna make it capitals, right? So name text field. We'll call it handler. Name text field handler, and then it's the superclass is Java Lang object, just like normal. But my interface, I'm going to add in action listener, right? You notice I'm just typing this interface in. There it is. Now it says, do I want to add my public static void main? No. How about my constructors from my superclass? Or my inherited abstract methods? Let me just try to click both those boxes, see what happens, right? All right, let's try this out. So boom, see what happens. Okay, so that's good, right? I've got my my constructor, which doesn't really do anything, because if I go back to the PowerPoint, you notice that we don't have a constructor in this class at all. We just have an overridden method, but that's what we need. We need this overridden method, this action listener right here. So we'll kill this. This is called my action listener, and this is my action performed, right? Here's my action performed. So when it's triggered, right, what I want to say is, well, then let's do something. Event, that's what this thing is, event dot, get action, and it says get action command, right? A get action command, that's what it's listening for, right? And then it's basically saying my string format, right? I'm formatting it, and I'm getting this action command, and my action command is actually going to listen for my enter key being pressed, right? And what I'm going to do here, right, if you notice, is I'm going to create an action J option pane to set up my string to pump it out, right? Well, that's cool and all, but what I really want to do, we're running a little bit out of time, right, is I want to create that. So I want to say something like this in this thing. When my and this is my, by the way, this action event, this is what this is, right? I want to do one of these. I want to say event as an example, right? My event here, dot, and notice how I have all these different types of events. Equals my, my get class, get modifier, hash codes, different things that it has here that are inherited. I'll wait. I can wait for a certain time. Action event mask, action last, a bunch of different things. One of the things I have here is this get action command, and it says returns the command string associated with this action. And this string allows a modal component to specify one of several commands. And if you notice, it gives you a bit of a an introduction as to what this thing does, right? So that's what this one does. Get source, it tells me the source. It says this object or which the event initially occurred. Which object did I press to give me that? That's what the source does, right? Get ID, get modifiers, get when, all this kind of stuff, right? So I know what the source is because the only one that's going to be associated with the source is this name text field handler, which I'm going to instantiate, right? Because I've got this name text field handler right now. Let's just save it for now. I'll come back and fix it. And what I want to do here is I want to instantiate an object of text field handler in the global space of the class itself, right? That might be the right thing to do, right? And we'll make it a private field, right? So we'll say private, and this one will be the handler, right? So private, and then we're going to call this name text field handler, right? We'll call it text field handler or name text field handler in lowercase, right? That's what this thing is, and it's private, so we're going to have to make an underscore, right? And I want to instantiate it when I set up my pane, which means probably when I initialize. I want to also initialize this stuff or in my UI components. Let's just do it here. So we'll say this dot underscore name text field handler, right, is equal to new name text field handler, right? That's what it's going to do, right? So I'm going to kind of set up that new text field handler. And now what I want to do is this text field, I want to add an action listener that's going to call the name this dot, maybe okay, adding extra brackets for nothing. Name text field handler, right? That's going to handle everything. And notice now there's no error, right? Because my name text field handler is another class, and all it's going to happen is it's going to call the object of this class to handle the events. So I'm going to have some triggers that are going to happen because I'm listening for triggers. I set up a class that I'm referring to, and I'm going to refer to this class as my handler for this action for this text box. All right, this is a hard thing to do. If you've never done event handling before, it's you don't know what's happening. If you've done any kind of event handling before, then it might seem somewhat familiar to you. All right, so we go back here. So how do I do something here? So when any kind of event, I want to do let's just to say any kind of event at all. I want a system.out.println to see what happens. And I'll say event, right? Let's see what happens. So any kind of event that fires, I want to print out the event, thing to see what goes on, right? All right, let's check this out. So I'm going to going back to program, and I'm going to fire this up. I'm going to press play. Cool. All right, so I've got my thing in there. I'm going to kind of click in there and start typing and press enter, event. Right, see that? And I go back and I press enter again, event, right? Every time I click that enter button, it seems that I got an event happening. So the enter event is the main kind of default event for TextBox, right? Which makes sense. But I can't enter stuff in. So if I press enter, this is cool, right? I want to be able to reset the label, right? My label. I want to reset it, right? To to whatever I do here. So how do I have access to it in here? Do I? How do I pass in a reference, right, to my class so I can access it later on, right? So I want to pass a reference to my example window class. So when I create my my override, right, I want to be able to have a reference to the this keyword when I do my event handler, right? So I can go back and modify an object. Because if I do one of these, if I say this.hello label, I got no hello label here at all. I want to access my hello label somehow, right? I want to access all my stuff from my other class, right? Now notice when I made my name text field handler, it's just another class, which means I can pass into my constructor anything I want. For example, a reference to this, right? Now I don't have this kind of constructor, but I can create a constructor in the name text field handler that's in the example window class, right? Let's just go there into this thing for a second and create a constructor. How do I do that? It's got to be a public constructor, right? Which I'm going to call the same thing, right? So it's got to be public name text field handler. And I want to take in a reference to my class, Now it's going to be any type of object I want, right? In this particular case, I know that the example window, right, is a JFrame, right? So I'm going to take a JFrame object, and I'm going to call it, you know, something that I'm taking in, a JFrame. So it's going to be like, you know, calling window. We'll call it calling window. Calling window. The calling window of this particular event, right? And notice how it says, hey, I don't know what JFrame is, and I got to add this import in here as well. It fixes that import. There we go. So now I've got a reference in here, but it's only within my constructor. I need to make this so it's like a private function, a private variable that I can access. So I'm going to call this private JFrame, right, underscore calling window, right? That's the calling window. And I want to make a reference to this. So I'm going to say this dot underscore calling window is equal to calling window, right? Because the calling window that I'm referring to in this side is actually this local variable that I'm getting in. Okay, cool. So this calling window. Well, that's cool. That means that I can do one of these. If this is just a JFrame, I know that it has JFrame properties, but I don't want to make it a JFrame, do I? I want to make it example window. Because if I give it example window authority, right, then I get the ability for me to know that the calling window is of type example window, which has these variables that are linked into it, right? An example of that would be like this. I'm going to say this dot underscore calling window dot, and I know that it has a label, right? For example, my hello label that underscore hello label, hey, dot set hello label, remember the hello label setter, right? To whatever I want to change, right? My setter to my new hello label if I want to do that. But I don't want to do that. I want a getter. I want to get a reference to my hello label. So here's get hello label. There it is. And I want to set the text of my hello label to whatever the text is going to be, which is the text that I'm getting from my box, right? Which I'm getting from my, whatever the object is that I'm getting, right? So remember that this box, whatever I've typed in there, I want to get a reference to that. But for now, let's just say, you know, you pressed enter, right? We're going to finish this example off later on. So whenever I click enter on the box, it's going to change my hello label, the first time anyway, to say you pressed enter. Okay, let's see if this works. Right, so set everything here, go back over here. Okay, we're passing in a reference to this. Oh, name text field handler. It says create constructor for the name text field handler, right? Let's go back up here, right, to see where this name text field handler is. Here's a name text field handler. I've got it here. It does have a constructor that calls the calling window, name text field handler. What am I doing wrong? Let's just save everything and see what happens. Save. Nothing's wrong. Okay, and let's just run it in my program.java file. Boom. Here it is. So when I type in a name like, I'm typing. I'm done. Yeah, come in. I'm done. And you press enter, right? So I get a response from a window in there. You can see how it pops up, right? You press E because I didn't have my label's not big enough to hold it. Okay, that's it for now. We'll get together label and continue this little event example.